5 days after they sliced my stomach open to bring my baby into the world. I came home craving only my bed and my perfect husband. Instead, I found the man who kissed my forehead every night had sold everything I owned, leaving us to die. He thought a bleeding, exhausted mother would be too weak to fight back. He calculated wrong. This is not a story of surrender. This is how I turned the hunter into my prey. Hello, everyone. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for tuning in to Maya Revenge Stories today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to continue operations, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here very soon and will shift our focus entirely to Patreon. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please support us by joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to even more incredible, exclusive true stories with extended lengths and highly detailed situations that we cannot publish on YouTube, all brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors. You can easily join us by scanning the QR code on your screen right now, or by clicking the Patreon link located in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Let us dive right into today's harrowing tale. Stepping into the shoes of a woman named Kylie Fox. I am 34 years old, and up until the moment my life shattered into a million jagged pieces, I was a senior project manager at Nebula Dynamics, a massive tech firm right here in Seattle. My reality was a comfortable, predictable bubble. I had a demanding but rewarding career, a beautiful suburban home with a nursery painted the softest shade of sage green, and a husband, Marcus, who had spent the last 9 months of my pregnancy acting like the ultimate protector. He attended every single ultrasound, massaged my swollen ankles, and whispered promises of our beautiful future against my belly. I spent 5 days in the maternity ward, recovering from a brutal, emergency cesarean section. My body was a battleground of stitches, bruising, and agonizing pain, but holding my newborn son, Leo, made every ounce of suffering worth it. On the morning of my discharge, Marcus told me he had to run home early to prepare the house, set up the balloons, and make sure everything was completely sterile and perfect for our arrival. I took a cab home, clutching my tiny, fragile baby to my chest, dreaming only of my own bed, my own pillows, and the loving embrace of my husband. The cab pulled up to our driveway, but the picturesque welcome I had envisioned was violently ripped away. Instead of a welcome home banner, a massive industrial dumpster sat on our pristine lawn. A crew of rough-looking men in heavy boots were hauling out our custom sofa, our dining table, and the antique rug we bought on our honeymoon. My heart slammed against my ribs. I paid the driver, ignoring the sharp, tearing sensation in my lower abdomen as I hauled the heavy baby carrier up the walkway. "Hey, what are you doing? Put that down!" I screamed, my voice cracking with panic. A woman in a sharp gray suit stepped out from my front door, holding a clipboard. She looked at me, taking in my pale face, my sweat-stained maternity clothes, and the sleeping infant in my arms, with absolute cold detachment. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone entirely devoid of warmth. "This is my house," I fired back, my breath coming in shallow, painful gasps. "Where is my husband? Where is Marcus?" The woman sighed, flipping a page on her clipboard. "Ma'am, I am the property manager for the new owners. This house was sold in a cash transaction exactly 3 days ago. The previous owner, a Mr. Marcus Fox, vacated the premises yesterday morning. We are just clearing out the remaining staging furniture." "3 days ago, that is impossible," I shouted, the volume waking Leo, who immediately began to wail. "I own half of this house. He cannot sell it without my consent." She reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers, holding it out just far enough for me to read the top page. It was a formal transfer of deed, attached to a notarized power of attorney. I stared at the bottom line. There, in bold black ink, was my signature. The world spun violently on its axis. My ears rang with a deafening pitch. It was my signature, but I had never signed that document. I closed my eyes, a sickening realization washing over me like ice water. Months ago, Marcus had brought me a stack of insurance papers to sign while I was distracted with work and severe morning sickness. He had slipped this death warrant into the pile. He had planned this for months. He waited until I was sliced open, bleeding, and heavily medicated in a hospital bed to pull the trigger. My hands shook violently as I dug my phone out of my diaper bag. I dialed his number. It went straight to a disconnected tone. He was gone. The locks on the front door were already changed. Gleaming in the harsh afternoon sun, my sanctuary was a fortress I could no longer enter. Panicking, I pulled out my primary credit card to call us another cab. Maybe get us a hotel room to figure this out. I called the number on the back of the card to check the balance. The automated voice informed me that the account had been closed. I tried the joint checking account. $0. I tried my personal emergency savings. $0. Every single financial lifeline I had was severed. The physical pain of my incisions suddenly flared, a hot, searing agony that brought me to my knees right there on the concrete driveway. I touched my hand to my stomach and felt the warm, sticky dampness of blood seeping through my bandage and soaking into my shirt. I was bleeding, homeless, entirely penniless, and holding a 5-day-old infant in the middle of the street. There was only one place left to go. I had to swallow every ounce of pride I possessed. I gathered Leo, forced myself to my feet, and began the agonizing journey to the bus stop. It took me 3 hours and 2 different public buses to reach the gritty outskirts of Tacoma. I stood in front of a peeling, run-down apartment building, the rain just beginning to fall, and knocked on the thin wooden door of my older sister. She was drowning in her own debts, working double shifts just to survive. But when she opened the door and saw me, pale as a ghost, bleeding, and clutching a crying newborn, she just pulled me inside and locked the door behind us. That tiny, cramped apartment became my temporary refuge, the very place where the naive, trusting wife died, and the woman who would burn Marcus down to ash was born. The air in my sister's apartment smelled of stale bleach and old cooking grease, a constant reminder of the grim reality we were now trapped in. The walls were paper-thin, violently vibrating every time a neighbor shouted or a police siren wailed down the cracked avenue outside. I spent my agonizing days nursing a fever that threatened to set my surgical incision on fire, pacing the cramped floorboards while soothing a colicky infant who seemed to sense his mother's utter despair. Desperation forced my hand. I swallowed my pride and called the Human Resources Department at Nebula Dynamics, begging for an emergency advance on my salary just to buy food. The corporate representative on the line had a polite, entirely sterile voice that made the catastrophic news she delivered hurt even more. She coldly informed me that Marcus, acting as my lawful spouse and utilizing the very same forged power of attorney that stole my home, had legally withdrawn my entire 401k retirement fund under a fabricated hardship exemption. Worse yet, he had routed my paid maternity leave compensation directly into an offshore holding account I had absolutely no access to. Every single dime I had ever earned, every safety net I had meticulously built over the last 10 years of my grueling career, was gone. It was a Tuesday night, and the sky over the Pacific Northwest opened up in a torrential, punishing downpour. The metal formula canister on the kitchen counter was completely empty. Leo was screaming, his tiny fists clenched in raw hunger, his cries echoing off the damp plaster walls. My sister was working a grueling graveyard shift at a local diner, leaving me entirely alone. My fever had spiked dangerously high, and the skin around my fresh stitches was angry, red, and throbbing with a sickening heat. I frantically dug through the pockets of my heavy winter coat and found exactly a single $50 bill. It was the absolute last of my cash. There was no backup plan. I wrapped Leo tightly in my sister's threadbare yellow raincoat, pressing his fragile body to my chest to shield him from the freezing wind, and began the brutal walk to the 24-hour pharmacy 6 blocks away. Every step was an agony that tore at my abdomen, the relentless rain lashing against my face. Mingling with hot tears I was far too exhausted to wipe away. The harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights of the pharmacy blinded me as I pushed my weight against the heavy glass doors. The store smelled overwhelmingly of cheap antiseptic and stale perfume. I dragged my feet down the aisle, grabbing the cheapest generic brand of infant formula and a small plastic bottle of ibuprofen, frantically calculating the state sales tax in my head to ensure I would not go over my $50 limit. As I dragged myself toward the checkout counter, I noticed a frail figure standing at the register. It was an elderly woman, draped in a saturated, moth-eaten trench coat that smelled distinctly of damp wool and rain-soaked pavement. Her thin gray hair was plastered to her skull, and she was trembling so violently she could barely hold herself upright. Behind the counter, a young pharmacist with a remarkably smug expression aggressively crossed his arms. "I am telling you for the third time, lady, the card is declined. I cannot give you the nitroglycerin without payment. It is strict store policy." The pharmacist snapped, his voice dripping with blatant disdain. The old woman kept pushing a worn, peeling piece of plastic toward him across the counter. "Please, my heart, I just need a few days of the prescription. I will bring the cash tomorrow." The pharmacist rolled his eyes, letting out a loud, mocking sigh that echoed in the quiet store. "This is not a charity kitchen. Step aside now, or I'm calling security to have you removed." I stood there frozen, clutching my starving baby, my own pulse hammering a frantic rhythm in my ears. If I gave away my money, I had absolutely no idea how Leo and I would survive the rest of the week. We were teetering dangerously on the very edge of homelessness and absolute starvation. But as I looked at the old woman's shaking hands, a vivid, heartbreaking memory of my late mother flashed violently behind my eyes. She had died of heart failure in a cold, sterile hospital room because we simply could not afford the experimental treatments she desperately needed to survive. A primal, undeniable voice of human conscience roared over my own crippling panic. I stepped forward, slamming my items onto the counter next to hers. "Ring it all up together," I told the cashier, my voice eerily steady and cold, despite the intense physical agony radiating from my stomach. I slapped my crumpled $50 bill onto the laminate surface. The total came to exactly $38.42. The pharmacist smirked dismissively, but processed the transaction, carelessly tossing the bagged heart medication onto the counter. I picked up the small paper bag and gently handed it to the old woman. She did not offer a hollow, tearful expression of gratitude. She did not cry, and she did not bless me. Instead, she slowly turned her head and locked her eyes directly onto mine. Her gaze was completely incongruous with her ragged, homeless appearance. It was sharp, intensely calculating, and piercingly intelligent, like a seasoned predator assessing the wind. "What is your exact name, girl?" she asked, her voice gravelly, deep, and holding an undeniable authority. "Kylie," I whispered, clutching Leo tighter to my chest. "Kylie Fox." She gave a single, curt nod, then turned and walked out into the relentless, driving rain, leaving me standing under the harsh lights, holding my meager change, utterly destitute, physically broken to the core, and drowning in a sea of profound, suffocating exhaustion. Exactly 14 days passed since that freezing night at the local pharmacy. The suffocating reality of extreme poverty had tightened its merciless grip around my throat. On a bleak Thursday morning, my sister and I stood completely frozen in the narrow, dimly lit hallway, staring at a bright pink eviction notice taped ruthlessly to her apartment door. The landlord had given us exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises due to unpaid rent. I held my sleeping baby tight against my chest, feeling the absolute crushing weight of failure bearing down on my shoulders. We were completely out of time, out of favors, and out of luck. Just as my sister leaned against the peeling wallpaper and began to sob quietly into her hands, a low, powerful hum vibrated through the cracked asphalt of our dilapidated parking lot. The usual chaotic rattling of the neighborhood seemed to pause instantly. A massive, sleek black limousine, polished to a perfect mirror shine, glided smoothly to a halt right in front of our crumbling building, in a gritty neighborhood where rusted sedans on cinder blocks were the absolute norm. The luxury vehicle looked like an alien spacecraft. Neighbors peeked cautiously through broken window blinds, and stray teenagers on the corner stopped talking, staring in stunned silence. The driver door opened, and a towering man dressed in an immaculate, tailored black suit stepped out onto the wet pavement. He moved with a terrifying, calculated grace, his eyes entirely hidden behind dark aviator sunglasses. He bypassed the muddy puddles, walking directly up the concrete stairs to where I stood completely paralyzed. Without uttering a single word of greeting, he extended a pristine, white-gloved hand toward me. Resting in the center of his palm was a small black velvet box. "Miss Kylie Fox, your presence is requested," he stated, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that echoed in the quiet stairwell. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I reached out and took the box. The velvet was soft against my painfully calloused skin. I snapped the lid open, and all the air was violently sucked out of my lungs. Nestled deep in the satin cushion was my wedding ring. It was the exact custom-cut diamond Marcus had slipped onto my finger 3 years ago, swearing his eternal devotion in front of our families. The faded pawnshop ticket tucked beneath the gold band showed he had hawked it for a miserable fraction of its worth on the exact same day he authorized the sale of our home. A fresh wave of nauseating betrayal washed over me, instantly replaced by a sharp, terrifying confusion. "Who sent this? How did you get this?" I demanded, my voice raw, desperate, and highly defensive. The man simply gestured gracefully toward the tinted rear door of the limousine, which was now sliding open with a soft, mechanical hiss. "The answers you are looking for are waiting inside. Please, step in." I looked desperately at my sister, gently handing her the baby carrier. I took a deep, jagged breath, steeling my shattered nerves, and marched toward the gaping door of the luxury vehicle. The interior was a massive cavern of buttery leather, mahogany accents, and the faint, incredibly expensive scent of sandalwood. Sitting opposite the door, casually holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, was a woman who commanded the enclosed space like a queen presiding over her throne room. She was draped in a tailored charcoal cashmere suit that screamed bespoke luxury. A thick string of flawless, luminescent pearls rested heavily against her collarbone, and her silver hair was perfectly coiffed into an elegant style. But the piercing, predatory eyes were absolutely unmistakable. It was the frail, supposedly homeless woman from the pharmacy. "Sit down, Kylie," she commanded gently, her tone completely devoid of the pathetic tremor I had heard 2 weeks prior. I sank into the plush leather seat, entirely speechless, my mind struggling to process the visual impossibility in front of me. "Allow me to properly introduce myself," she said, setting her crystal glass down on a polished wooden console. "I am Eleanor Vance. Before I decided to spend my retirement engaging in eccentric social experiments to test the morality of modern society, I ran one of the most ruthless, aggressive hedge funds on Wall Street. I specialized in hostile corporate takeovers. I crush powerful people for a living." I swallowed hard, my brain racing violently to connect the scattered dots. You were pretending, the declined credit card, the wet, ruined coat. A necessary, temporary filter to find someone who still possessed a genuine soul, Eleanor replied smoothly, crossing her legs. "When you spent your absolute last $38 to save a complete stranger, you secured a very powerful ally. I never, ever leave a debt unpaid. I deployed my private intelligence network to look into your current situation. I initially wanted to just write you a massive check, perhaps buy you a beautiful new house. But what my forensic investigators uncovered required a much more strategic, aggressive intervention." Eleanor reached onto the seat beside her and pulled out a thick, heavy leather-bound dossier. Tossing it onto the console between us, the thick file was stamped heavily with red confidential seals. "Your husband, Marcus, did not just abandon you for another woman, Kylie. He is not merely a cheating, opportunistic coward. He is a financial criminal of the highest possible order," Eleanor stated, her voice slicing through the quiet cabin like a surgical scalpel. "That expedited cash sale on your house. The property was not bought by a nice family. It was purchased by a ghost shell company, a fraudulent corporate entity created specifically to launder highly illegal money. He used the equity of your beautiful home to clean illicit, stolen funds." My stomach violently churned, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. Illicit funds, from where? Eleanor leaned forward, the temperature in the limousine seeming to drop 10 degrees instantly. "This brings us to the most critical and dangerous part of his entire master plan. For the past 18 months, Marcus has been systematically embezzling millions of dollars from his venture capital firm. He knew the federal financial auditors were slowly closing in on him, but Marcus is incredibly cunning. He did not put a single stolen dollar into his own bank accounts." She tapped a sharp, manicured fingernail violently against the leather folder. "He used your forged signature, your social security number, and your clean, unblemished corporate background to open a massive labyrinth of offshore banking accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Every single stolen cent is parked directly under your legal name." The horrifying, catastrophic reality of her words crashed into me like a runaway freight train. The forged power of attorney was not just a tool to sell the house and leave me penniless. It was the master key to framing me for a massive corporate fraud scheme. "He set you up to be the ultimate fall guy," Eleanor concluded grimly, her eyes locking onto mine with fierce intensity. "He is actively preparing to flee the country right now. When the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI finally raid his corporate office, Marcus will be a ghost drinking cocktails on a tropical beach, and the entire paper trail will lead federal agents directly to your sister's apartment door. If he boards that plane, Kylie, you will not just lose your home and your dignity, you will be facing a mandatory life sentence in a federal penitentiary." The heavy silence inside the limousine stretched into a taut, vibrating wire. Eleanor leaned back against the buttery leather, her piercing eyes never leaving my face as she laid out the ultimate crossroads of my life. "I can offer you two very different paths, Kylie," Eleanor stated softly, though her voice carried the weight of a judge handing down a sentence. "Path number 1 is the easy way out. I have a team of fixers who can forge immaculate documents for you and your son. I will wire $5 million into a secure, untraceable account in Zurich. You can take your sister, board a private charter tonight, and disappear to a quiet, beautiful villa in the Mediterranean. Marcus will eventually face the federal authorities, but you will be completely safe, comfortable, and far away from the fallout." She paused, taking a slow sip of her sparkling water before leaning forward, the predatory gleam returning to her eyes. "Path number 2 is war. You stay right here in Seattle. You step into my world. You borrow my resources, and we systematically dismantle Marcus piece by piece. We do not just stop him from escaping, we strip him of his stolen wealth, his arrogant pride, and his freedom. But I must warn you, if we fail, the FBI will inevitably trace the forged offshore accounts back to you, and you will spend the rest of your natural life in a concrete cell." I turned my head to look out the tinted window. Beyond the rain-slicked glass, I could see the crumbling facade of my sister's apartment building. Inside that damp, freezing room, my newborn son was sleeping in a second-hand crib, wearing clothes bought with coins scraped from the bottom of a jar. Marcus had orchestrated that misery. He had smiled at me in the maternity ward, kissed my forehead, and then gleefully signed my death warrant, leaving me to bleed out on a concrete driveway. A strange, icy calm washed over my entire body. The terrified, weeping victim who had begged for her home just 2 weeks ago evaporated completely, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. "I do not want to run," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady whisper. "I want to burn his entire life to the ground." A slow, wicked smile spread across Eleanor's face. "Excellent choice. Let us get to work." Less than an hour later, the limousine descended into an underground bunker beneath a soaring glass skyscraper in downtown Seattle. A private biometric elevator shot us up 65 floors to Eleanor's penthouse. The moment the steel doors parted, I realized this was not merely a luxury residence. It was a high-tech corporate espionage command center, disguised as a modern art gallery. The massive living room was stripped of traditional furniture. In its place sat a horseshoe configuration of heavy black desks, groaning under the weight of liquid-cooled server towers and dozens of glowing ultra-high-definition monitors. 3 individuals were typing frantically in the darkened room, their faces illuminated only by the cascading lines of green and white code. Eleanor introduced them simply as her financial intelligence unit, a team of elite digital forensics experts who made their living executing hostile takeovers and tracking hidden assets for Wall Street billionaires. For the next 10 hours, I sat beside the lead architect of the team, a brilliant, heavily tattooed man named Silas, drinking black coffee and mapping out every single detail of my husband's life. Silas had managed to locate the digital shadow of the shell company Marcus used to sell my house, but they had hit a massive, impenetrable wall. He is using military-grade, multi-tiered encryption to shield the offshore routing numbers, Silas explained, aggressively rubbing his tired eyes. The firewall is designed to self-destruct and wipe the servers if we try a brute force attack. We need his master cipher, a digital key. People always anchor their master passwords to something deeply personal, something deeply rooted in their psychology. Do you know of any dates, numbers, or phrases he is obsessed with? I stared at the blinking prompt on the screen. Marcus was arrogant, but he was also incredibly narcissistic and fundamentally lazy. He thought he was the smartest man in the room, which meant he would never use a random string of generated characters. He would use a monument to his own ego. Try the date he secured his first major corporate promotion, I instructed, my mind racing. Combine it with the zip code of his childhood home in Boston, and capitalize the first letter of his college fraternity. Silas raised an eyebrow but typed the exact sequence into the terminal. The screen flashed bright red. Access denied. No, wait, I said, leaning closer to the monitor, placing my hand on Silas's shoulder. Marcus is completely obsessed with his own legacy. He always joked that he was a self-made king. Try the phrase King Marcus, followed by the exact dollar amount of his very first 6-figure bonus check. Spell the numbers out in letters. Silas typed furiously, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. A tense, suffocating silence hung in the penthouse as the loading icon spun. Suddenly, the screen flashed a brilliant, blinding green, a cascade of hidden directories, banking manifests, and private emails flooded the monitors. We were inside his fortress. Got him, Silas whispered, a sharp grin forming on his face. The team immediately went to work, sifting through the massive trove of decrypted data. What we found over the next 2 hours painted a picture of a criminal conspiracy far more elaborate than Eleanor had even anticipated. I have his travel itinerary, one of the analysts called out from across the room. He has chartered a private Gulfstream jet scheduled to depart from a small municipal airfield in exactly 72 hours. The destination is a remote island nation in the Caribbean. It is a sovereign territory with absolutely no extradition treaty with the United States. Once his boots touch that tarmac, the federal government cannot touch him. He is not traveling alone, Silas added, pulling up a secondary document. He booked the charter for 2 passengers. Let me pull the passport scan for the +1. An image populated on the central monitor, and all the air violently left my lungs. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned completely white. Staring back at me from the screen was a woman with sharp features, perfectly styled hair, and cold, dead eyes. It was the property manager, the exact same woman in the gray suit who had stood on my front porch, holding a clipboard, and smugly informed me that I was trespassing on my own property. They had not just hired a dirty real estate agent to process the fraudulent paperwork. They were sleeping together. They had planned this entire operation side by side. She stood there on my driveway, watching me bleed and cry with my newborn baby, knowing she was about to board a private jet with my husband and my stolen wealth. The sheer, unadulterated evil of it was breathtaking. They honestly believed they had pulled off the perfect, flawless crime. Look at the routing schedule for the embezzled funds, Eleanor commanded, stepping up behind me and placing a firm, steadying hand on my shoulder. Silas opened a complex flowchart detailing the movement of the stolen millions. Marcus has successfully siphoned the money out of his company, but it is not completely clear yet. It is currently sitting in a digital escrow server, a cryptographic clearinghouse designed to wash the funds through multiple international nodes before final deposit into the Cayman accounts. When does the clearinghouse release the money? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. Silas traced his finger along a bright yellow timeline on the screen. The smart contract is heavily encrypted and time-locked. It is completely automated. The server will execute the final transfer and disperse the millions into his untraceable offshore accounts at exactly 12 o'clock noon this coming Friday. That is exactly 4 hours before his flight takes off. I stared at the glowing digits on the monitor. Marcus had engineered a ticking time bomb. Assuming I was completely paralyzed by grief and poverty, rotting away in a rundown apartment, he thought I was weak. But looking at the digital architecture of his stolen empire, I realized he had made one fatal, catastrophic mistake. He had grouped all his stolen money into a single, automated bottleneck. I turned to Eleanor, a dangerous fire igniting in my chest. We are not going to report this to the police. If we call the authorities now, the escrow server will detect the breach, execute an emergency protocol, and vanish the money into the dark web forever. Eleanor tilted her head, her eyes flashing with absolute delight. Then what exactly is your play? Kylie. We are going to let them think they won, I replied, staring directly at the photograph of the smiling mistress on the screen. We are going to open the cage, let them step inside, and then we are going to lock the door behind them. The penthouse transformed into a war room fueled by black coffee and the relentless, hypnotic clicking of mechanical keyboards. Silas and his team had breached the outer walls of Marcus's digital fortress, but cracking the core escrow server by brute force was entirely out of the question. If we tripped the central security alarms, the system was hardwired to scatter the stolen millions across hundreds of anonymous cryptocurrency wallets, rendering the money utterly untraceable forever. We needed the digital equivalent of an inside job. We needed Marcus to unlock the vault for us. We are going to plant a Trojan horse, Silas explained, his fingers flying across his terminal. A piece of dormant, invisible malicious code hidden deep inside a standard system update on his personal laptop. But for the Trojan to bypass his internal encryption, we need him to initiate a manual override. We need him to log into the main offshore accounts while actively bypassing his own secondary security protocols. He will never do that under normal circumstances, I replied, staring at the glowing monitors. He is far too methodical. We have to make him panic. When arrogant men panic, they make catastrophic mistakes. I walked over to a vacant terminal and began drafting the most important email of my entire life. We were not going to attack Marcus directly. We were going to poison the water in his own camp. I targeted the property manager, the woman who had stood on my driveway and coldly watched my life fall apart. Using a heavily encrypted dark web proxy server, I forged an internal communication that appeared to be a leaked, highly classified memo from the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. The document was a masterpiece of bureaucratic terror. It detailed an active, ongoing federal probe into the exact fraudulent real estate transaction involving my home. But the true venom lay in the carefully crafted footnotes. The fake memo explicitly listed Marcus as a cooperating federal informant who had secured a provisional immunity deal by surrendering his accomplice. Furthermore, the document referenced a flagged international flight manifest departing this Friday, specifically noting it was booked for exactly one single passenger. Silas injected the forged document directly into the primary inbox of the mistress's personal smartphone, bypassing her spam filters completely. Then, we sat back in the dark, watching the digital tripwires we had set around their devices. It took exactly 45 minutes for the poison to take effect. Through the compromised microphone on Marcus's laptop, We listened as their supposedly perfect criminal romance violently imploded. The audio feed crackled to life with the sound of shattering glass in his rented luxury apartment. The mistress was screaming, her voice completely unhinged, accusing Marcus of setting her up to take the fall for the entire embezzlement scheme. She demanded to see the flight tickets. She demanded access to the offshore routing numbers to secure her half of the money. Marcus, entirely blindsided and completely unaware of the fake IRS email, reacted with explosive, defensive rage. He called her paranoid. He refused to show her the accounts, realizing that she was dangerously close to compromising the entire operation. The shouting match escalated into a vicious, tearing psychological war. She threatened to walk straight into the FBI field office and hand them the forged power of attorney documents if he did not transfer her cut immediately. Trapped, terrified, and rapidly losing control of his accomplice, Marcus made his fatal error. He grabbed his laptop, stormed out of the apartment, and drove to a late-night coffee shop to escape her. In his desperate, blinding rush to change the master passwords and lock his mistress out of the escrow server, he connected to an unsecured, public wireless network. He disabled his two-factor authentication to speed up the process. "He is exposed," Silas shouted, the glow of the monitors reflecting in his eyes. "He just dropped his secondary firewall to lock her out. I am writing his authentication token straight into the core server." Lines of green code cascaded down the main screen like a waterfall. Silas weaponized the Trojan horse, latching onto Marcus's administrative privileges before the system could verify the intrusion. Within a matter of seconds, Silas fundamentally rewrote the architecture of the offshore accounts, permanently locking Marcus out of his own stolen empire and transferring total administrative control directly to Eleanor's secure servers. While Silas and I waged a silent digital war, Eleanor was executing a masterclass in corporate violence. The ghost shell company Marcus had used to purchase my house was technically a subsidiary of a larger, publicly traded microcapitalization firm. It was a common tactic used to hide dirty money behind layers of corporate bureaucracy. But Eleanor Vance did not care about bureaucracy. She cared about leverage. Over the course of 48 hours, Eleanor leveraged her massive, unlimited capital to initiate a brutal, merciless hostile takeover on the open stock market. She systematically bought up the majority voting shares and crushed the outstanding debt of the parent company. By Thursday afternoon, Eleanor essentially owned the corporate entity that held the deed to my house. With a single phone call to her elite team of corporate lawyers, she filed an immediate injunction, legally freezing every single liquid asset tied to that company. The cash Marcus had generated from stealing my home was completely trapped, paralyzed by impenetrable corporate litigation. Thursday evening arrived, blanketing the city of Seattle in a cold, heavy fog. It was the night before their scheduled flight to the Caribbean. The tension in the penthouse was thick enough to cut with a knife. Silas had routed a live mirrored feed of Marcus's laptop screen directly to our primary wall monitor. At exactly 9 o'clock, Marcus sat alone in a dark hotel room, having completely abandoned his mistress to ensure his own survival. We watched his cursor move across the screen as he navigated to the offshore clearinghouse portal. He was logging in to verify that the millions of dollars were safely queued for the final midnight transfer. He typed his credentials. The screen loaded. For a fraction of a second, the dashboard displayed his massive stolen fortune. Then, Silas hit the execution key. We watched in absolute, breathtaking silence as the numbers on Marcus's screen began to violently roll backward. The millions became hundreds of thousands. The thousands became hundreds. Within 3 seconds, the total balance of every single offshore account he had bled dry sat at exactly $0.00. Marcus frantically refreshed the page. He clicked the mouse so hard we could hear the plastic snapping through the audio feed. The screen flashed white, and the entire banking interface completely vanished, replaced by a pitch-black background. In the exact center of his monitor, a single line of stark white text slowly typed itself out, letter by letter. Did you forget something at home? The message on the screen shattered whatever fragile remnants of sanity Marcus had left, driven by absolute, unhinged desperation and a primal, suffocating greed to reclaim his stolen millions. His mind completely snapped. He convinced himself that I had somehow partnered with a rogue hacker to hijack the escrow server, stealing the digital keys for myself. He believed I was hiding in the only secure location that still legally tied us together. He abandoned his hotel room, jumped into his rented sports car, and drove like a complete madman through the heavy, blinding Seattle fog. He was heading straight to our old house in the suburbs, fully intending to use whatever brute physical force was necessary to make me unlock those offshore accounts. He thought he was coming to corner a terrified, broken, and helpless victim. But Eleanor Vance owned that house now. She had instructed her private security team to unlock the front gates, leaving the path wide open for the rat to run directly into the trap. Marcus kicked the heavy oak front door so violently it splintered entirely off its brass hinges. He stormed into the grand living room with a wild, feral scream, his fists clenched and his eyes manic. But he froze dead in his tracks, the breath catching sharply in his throat. The massive living room was not empty, and I was not hiding. I was sitting perfectly still in a luxurious high-backed armchair in the center of the room, holding my sweet, sleeping Leo securely in my arms. Standing immediately to my right was Eleanor, her posture absolutely immaculate, leaning casually on a silver-handled cane with a terrifyingly serene smile on her face, and fanning out across the entire perimeter of the room, with their service weapons drawn and gold badges gleaming under the bright recessed lighting, were over a dozen elite federal agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission. "Where is the money? Kylie," Marcus screamed, his face turning a deep shade of purple with rage, completely ignoring the federal agents aiming their weapons directly at his chest. "Give me the encryption keys right now." I looked at the man I had once promised to love for the rest of my life. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, undeniable power. "I do not have your money, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, devastating authority that echoed clearly through the massive room. "I do not have a single dime of it. You see, since you went through all the trouble of legally establishing a comprehensive power of attorney in my name, I decided to put it to good use. Acting as your authorized representative, I formally directed the offshore clearinghouse to return 100% of those embezzled funds directly back to the original investors you stole from. The money is completely gone. You have absolutely nothing." Before his brain could even begin to process the sheer magnitude of his total financial annihilation, the shattered front door swung wider. Two federal marshals marched a woman into the brightly lit room in heavy steel handcuffs. It was his mistress, the former property manager. Her expensive designer clothes were rumpled and stained, her perfect makeup smeared completely down her face in dark, terrified tracks. "She made a very smart deal, Marcus," the lead federal investigator stated, stepping forward with a pair of heavy iron handcuffs. To secure leniency for her own direct involvement in the real estate fraud scheme, she handed over every single piece of physical evidence regarding your forged signatures, the fake insurance documents, and the offshore routing protocols. We have you dead to rights on federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and aggravated identity theft. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. His knees instantly gave out. The arrogant, untouchable corporate king collapsed onto the hardwood floor, sobbing uncontrollably in sheer, pathetic humiliation. As the federal agents yanked his arms aggressively behind his back and locked the cold steel cuffs around his wrists, guaranteeing an inevitable 30-year federal prison sentence, he looked up at me one final time. In his bloodshot, weeping eyes, I saw the horrifying realization that his greatest, most catastrophic mistake in this life was underestimating the woman he called his wife. Several months passed, and the dark, suffocating storm finally cleared from our lives. The executive board at Nebula Dynamics, horrified by the public revelation of my ex-husband's sweeping crimes and thoroughly impressed by my strategic, ruthless dismantling of his entire empire, did not just welcome me back. They formally promoted me to Senior Director of Operations with a massive salary increase. Furthermore, because I had actively assisted the Securities and Exchange Commission in recovering tens of millions of dollars of stolen investor funds, I was legally awarded a massive whistleblower bounty from the federal government. I used a portion of that incredible reward to purchase a beautiful, sunlit new home with a sprawling garden. Now, I sit in my lush, green backyard under the brilliant, warm afternoon sun. Eleanor Vance is sitting across the patio table from me, sipping iced tea and playfully teasing Leo, having proudly and fiercely adopted the role of his grandmother. I watch my beautiful son laugh, completely safe, completely secure, and surrounded by genuine love. People can steal a house with forged papers, but no one can strip away the strength of a mother protecting her child. Kindness is not a weakness. It is the ultimate weapon that ruthless people can never understand. Thank you all so very much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you found my journey compelling and want to hear more, I must ask for your help, because YouTube has demonetized our channel. We will unfortunately no longer upload new videos here in the near future and are moving our operations entirely to Patreon. Please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community to listen to the absolute best, exclusive, full-length true stories that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can scan the QR code currently on your screen or use the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment to join us right now. Thank you, and take care.